The Aged Care Act 2024 carries over some reforms that were made to the previous legislation that governed the requirements for governing bodies within aged care. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what those requirements are. It's important to understand that these requirements about the governing bodies apply to those providers who are registered in the categories for residential care and nursing and transition care. They don't, however, apply to a government entity or a local government authority. So for those providers who fit within the nursing and transition care or residential aged care, then there are a couple of very important requirements in relation to governing body membership that must be complied with. The first one is that the majority of the members of the governing body, that is your board or your committee of management or whatever similar organisation or body within your organisation fulfills those functions, the majority of the members must be independent non-executive members. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is that at least one member of the governing body must have experience in the provision of clinical care that is provided by your organisation. What does it mean when we say non-executive members? Well, what we're talking about there is somebody who is not a member of the executive leadership team of your organisation. For example, it wouldn't include the CEO, CFO, COO, etc. They may well be a member of your governing body, but they're not considered to be independent non-executive directors. In relation to independent, what we're talking about there is somebody who has no material connection to the organisation. We might be talking about here somebody who doesn't have an interest in ownership, in supply, in receiving the services and the like. So those people would be considered to be not independent. So we're looking for somebody who has no existing connection and doesn't sit within the executive leadership team as such. So we need more of those people, the independent non-executive directors, than those who are either executive or not independent. The other aspect, which I mentioned, is somebody who's got experience in the provision of clinical care that is provided by the organisation. What we're looking for here is somebody who actually has had experience or has current experience in the delivery of the services so that they can come to the board or your committee of management with real understanding about the clinical aspects of the service delivery. That will then inform their contribution to the board in a meaningful way that will supplement perhaps the lack of knowledge of others who don't have such a close connection to the delivery of services. There are a couple of exceptions to whether you need to have independent non-executive directors or clinical care members, and they relate to really the size of your governing body and the number of care recipients you deliver services to. That is, if your governing body has fewer than 5 members, then you don't need to comply with the obligations, provided, of course, that you also deliver services to less than 40 people. So it's not one or the other, it needs to be both that are in existence. The other exception is if you get an exemption from the department with respect to compliance with these requirements. Now, the exemptions are really meant to deal with temporary situations. You can't get a permanent exemption from compliance with it. So that's really important. It may be, for example, there's a particular circumstance where you can't fulfill a position for an independent non-executive director and you need some time to be able to comply with that. There are also some requirements in relation to the records that you must keep about governing bodies. And these include the following. With respect to your non-executive members, your independent non-executive members, then you need to keep records about their names and which of those people are in fact independent non-executive. We need to be quite explicit about that and have them identified. Similarly, for the person who fulfills the clinical care function, you need to keep records about who they are, what's their name, as well as the details of their experience. These records must be kept for 7 years, and to the extent that they may relate to a particular individual, you need to keep the records for 7 years after they cease their role, not 7 years from when they commence, but 7 years after they cease their role.